Chapter 7. My children, having described unto you the way in which the land of Camus became populated, and at length consisted of Upper and Lower Egypt, I would link as clearly as possible the so-called mythical period of this history to what is called the authentic historical period of Egypt. One thing will I point out, and it is the remainder of the world was proceeding to evolve and organize itself in almost exactly the same manner as Camus. The only reason I deal entirely with Camus is because, as I have told you in the Book of Truth, it was chosen to be the land of revelation, and it was predestined by the cosmos to play the final part in the history of the world called Earth. Temples of initiation were built in the other countries of the world. Also were the divine services of remembrance carried out in exactly the same manner as in Camus. The architectural relics which have survived in other countries, such as those continents at present known as North and South America, have done so by chance, and were not predestined to be stones of revelation, although those remnants will prove useful in connecting the civilizations of Camus with that of the continents of North, South, and Central America. Having made clear unto you these things, I shall return to Camus. The history of the divine dynasties of the masters need not be gone into except for a few small details which must be made clear. As I have told you, my children, Egypt was divided into Upper and Lower Egypt, and there was an Adamic prince ruling over each division, and these princes were also born from amongst the Adamic population. I would here tell you that it is becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish between the Adamic and Yahavic population, as they had become so mixed during the latter days of Atlantis, owing to the machinations of Satanaku. The general material rule was, however, that the Adamic population comprised the ruling classes in the priesthood, while the Yahavic population held subservient positions under their Adamic brethren. Do not misunderstand me by saying that as there was a distinction, it was impossible for the Yahavic men and women of earth to share the privileges of the Adamics, because this was not so. For if after various incarnations a Yahavic man or woman had evolved and progressed, then was he absorbed into the Adamic population, and was even born to Adamic parents. The only spirits who still were able to separate with certainty the two races were the karmic lords, of whom there were 7. When male-female twins were born, the old Atlantean custom of regarding them as being born wed as husband and wife was still observed, although from the point of view of divine birth this was not always correct. To return to what took place in the land of Egypt, I would say that neophytes were now received for initiation from the surrounding countries, for it was many thousands of years since the immigrants from Atlantis had spread over the face of the world. Again, evil crept in. For those people who had left Atlantis after the rebellion of Ithboleth had increased and multiplied, and you will remember that they had settled chiefly in Africa and America. Alas, they had been well nourished and schooled by Satanaku and his entities from the astral plane. They had taken unto themselves all manner of gods and idols, and in order that these people could be recognized, the cosmos had spoken unto El Duwad and had commanded him to cause them to have colored skins, so that those of Central America had reddish skin, while those of Africa and the East had some bronze skins and some black. The black and lowest races had survived today as the Negroes of South Africa. The inevitable thing happened. The people of Camus began gradually and secretly to intermarry with these dark-skinned people, and they in turn taught them all manner of heathenish practices, for now know you that they were all well organized under the guiding hand of Satanaku. They had their priests and kings, and during those times which followed immediately upon the final emigration from Atlantis, Satanaku had seen to it that these dark men should efface themselves, and should not annoy the new arrivals. Time went on, and they became gradually absorbed in the lands of Lower and Upper Egypt. In fact, an unofficial third kingdom was formed, and in about 7600 B.C. it had reached a high standard of efficiency, but yet it did not molest the kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt. Many of you, my children, will ask why. The reason was because this kingdom, which was situated in what is known as Nubia, sent its neophytes into the temple of the pyramidal center, and also into the center of the south, which was in Upper Egypt. Gradually the more material arts of initiation were becoming common knowledge of the priesthood of this kingdom, and they had visions of one day descending upon the lands of Upper and Lower Egypt, and molding them into one kingdom under their rule. Repeatedly was the master warned of what was taking place, but he was unable to stay the course of events. At last, in the year 7600 B.C., an army of men, some 10,000 strong, well armed and victualized, set out for the two kingdoms. One half of this army proceeded towards the pyramidal center, and the other converged upon the spot that is known as the Valley of the Tomb of the Kings, which is situated under the Libyan hills to the west of the river Nilos. After many days' journeying, these two armies arrived at their objective points. Things were, however, not as quite expected, for the centers of the north and south were ready for the attack, which had been shown under their kings by the occult knowledge held by the initiates who administered the laws of the temple. The heaviest fighting took place in the Valley of the Tombs, and a determined effort was made to reach the outer court of the sacred temple, which was within the city called at that time Tabos. After stubborn fighting, the city was completely surrounded, and the army of the king of Tabos was driven into the city. Then did the word of my father Ta-el-Duad come unto me, saying, I will stretch out my hand and cause an earthquake to shake the city, and I will cause the outer court of the temple to be destroyed, so that the entrance into the holy sanctuaries shall not be able to be seen by the enemy when they enter the city, which I will also cause to become a heap of ruins. And I will engulf many of those evil ones, and they shall be buried in the desolation which is to come, even if I have been commanded by the blessed cosmic Trinity. And behold, the reigning Master, who is even Nisu, shall relinquish the mortal body, and shall return unto his own place amongst the rayed children in the higher spheres. The Adamic priests and the population shalt thou warn, and thou shalt command them that they retreat through the city, so that the exultant enemy may be drawn unto them. And when they have come to the center of the city, I will cause the earth to commence its quaking. Having spoken thus unto me, my father departed. At this point I would tell you, my children, that the king of the invading armies was an incarnation of Ithboleth, the same that had caused all the strife in Atlantis, and his name was Charopolakis, to whom I referred to in the Book of Truth as the first usurper. I need hardly tell you that he had held himself aloof from the battle, and had camped at a very safe distance from the actual scene of the disaster. The entrance to the sacred sanctuaries they found not, as the quaking of the earth had obliterated all trace. Also was the outer court reduced to a state of ruin, which mingled with the rest of the town of Tabos. At length, after a long search, the invading army withdrew. I would here tell you, my children, that Charopocalis had been a neophyte, educated in the sanctuaries of the temple during previous years, and it was his desire for material advancement that had caused him to seek to turn the mysteries to his own use. He was an initiate of the more material arts of initiation, and he now sought to find a body which he called the Brotherhood of Knowledge. Temples were built, and names of the various masters were deified, and set up as gods whom the people worshipped. I shall now leave Upper Egypt, and shall proceed to the pyramidal center of Lower Egypt. The resistance here had been fierce, and the invading army had returned again into its own country. My children, it will be clear to you what was to be the future course of events. The administration of Upper Egypt having been overthrown, the people of the Third Kingdom proceeded to increase their borders at the expense of the Egyptians, who were not in a position to offer any very effective resistance. At length also did the act of intermarrying become so common that the two races absorbed each other. The brotherhood, founded by Charapolis, flourished and became a material religion, and during the years that followed a high standard of efficiency was reached. The arts of building became perfected, and also was there a large and well-organized army. The capital of this new kingdom, which had sprung out of the two former races, was situated upon the present site of Thebes and the valley of the tombs of the king. The inevitable happened. My children in the kingdoms of Upper and Lower Kemu were constantly at war with another. This state endured for about 1,000 years, and the unity of Egypt was not brought back till the year 6600 BC, when one Mentos arose from among the people of the pyramidal center and united the two lands. He took as his insignia of office the crown of the south, which was the crown of me, Osiris, and this was placed inside the crown of Ta-el-Duad, which was the crown of the rulers of Lower Egypt. The complete double crown of Mentos was identical with the double crown of me, Osiris, which I have mentioned in the Book of Truth, and it symbolized me as the son of Ta, and in that it appeared from out of the center of my father's crown. Chapter 8. Having described as clearly as possible the events which took place during the mythical period of the world history, I shall proceed to deal with what is termed the authentic historical period, and I shall point out how many of the statements made concerning this latter period are really nothing more than hypothesis, and incorrect at that. The first king who was strong enough to unite the lands of Upper and Lower Egypt under one crown was, as I have told you in the preceding chapter, Mentos. He was a reincarnation of one of the higher Adamics, who had been commanded to appear before my father Ta-el-Duad in the sacred heights of Atlantis at the time when he was preparing to have the sacred mysteries conveyed into Kamu under the charge of the various Ray children, who were to be future initiate rulers of the land of Egypt. Mentos, being full of intuition and psychic ability, had perceived that unless he united the two lands, the third kingdom of Nubia would in time conquer each part of Egypt separately while they were yet divided. Thus it happened, my children, that about the year 6620 B.C., this prince collected together a huge army, which was well trained and victualized, and proceeded to march on the land of Upper Egypt, all the time collecting recruits as he marched southward. In each town he caused his proclamations to be read, explaining to the people if they did not unite with him they would finally be overcome by the Nubians, whose property the land of Egypt would become. The army of Mentos increased until on his arrival at the place which had been the city of Tabos, he had rallied all the Egyptian people to his standard. His headquarters he made at this, which is some 50 miles north of the site of the ruins of Tabos. The temples were reinstated, and the worship of me, Osiris, and my twin and spouse eternal Isis, were revived in the south, while in the pyramidal province the worship of my father Ta was established, as it had always been from the time when the refugees had settled in the delta after the submerging of Atlantis. The only difference was that time had distorted the true form of worship in which my father Ta-el-Duad was considered to be the doorway through which the cosmic trinity was worshipped. In the province of Upper Egypt the same thing had happened, and the names of certain of the masters which had survived had been deified, and supposed likenesses in the form of statues were raised up to their memory. I have mentioned one or two of these in the Book of Truth. The king, who was now called the supreme lord of the two lands, did not interfere with the religious views of the state, but devoted his time to the consolidating what he had been able to unite, until at the end of his reign Upper and Lower Egypt were united as one big empire. And this was the beginning of what was lived in the history of the world called Earth as the Egyptian Empire. The various surrounding tribes were subdued, and the Nubians kept in check until at length the empire became so strong that she did not fear them any longer. To turn for a moment to the priesthood of Egypt, I would say a few words concerning their various deities. The chief deity of Upper Egypt was Ammon, or Amen, and this name has been handed down from the divine dynasty of the Masters, which I have explained in the Book of Truth. He was really El-Amanu, and the ensuing priesthood had singled out his name to be that of their chief god. So, my children, that is why Amen became the chief deity of the south. My name and that of my twin and spouse eternal Isis were also deified and helped to form the circle of the gods of Upper Egypt. I was looked upon as the god of rebirth into the world of everlasting light, where I reigned with Ra, the sun god. Amen was called the king of the gods, and this where the lands of Upper and Lower Egypt did not agree. For that of Lower Egypt called my father Ta-el-Duad, the king father of the gods. You will see, my children, that the priesthood of Lower Egypt were near the truth, as far as the name was concerned, because my beloved father Ta-el-Duad was in reality the father-king of the whole Duman Adamic race. However, the two lands and even their towns all had their own special and local gods who were worshipped. Sometimes they were deifications of the old masters of the divine dynasty, and sometimes they were not. This scheme, however, suited the plans of my father very well indeed, because, whilst all this external pomp and circumstances were being carried on, a secret circle of neophytes and adepts, who were reincarnations of the Ray children and Adamics, who had volunteered in Atlantis to be teachers of earth, gradually increased, and the secret mysteries were once again opened to a selected few, who guarded their precious secret very jealously indeed. Subterranean temples were built, and the external temples were at length brought under the rule of the secret body, which was gradually growing. The external pomp was kept up, and the kings were supported so that the land could be kept free from invasion, in order that the circle of initiates could be proceeded with its work of educating the neophytes of the surrounding countries. Only after passing the most terrible test were the intending neophytes received into the circle of the initiate brothers, whose chief centers were Memphis, which was built by Mentos, Heliopolis, and Thebos, better known as Thebes. The initiate center of Heliopolis had its visible sign, the sun's disk, and the old worship of Atennu was practiced. In very ancient times in Atlantis, the Lord Horus was held to be the medium through which the blessed Trinity of the cosmos was worshipped. And you will remember, my children, the great temple of the sacred heights of Atlantis was surmounted by the signs of the sun disk, with the 7 hands reaching out to the solar universe. These 3 chief centers received neophytes from Greece and the northern shores of the Mediterranean. The pyramidal center of Memphis had now become the chief center of initiation. And I would here tell you, my children, that the sacred house of my father Ptah, which had served as the home of the masters of the divine dynasty, had never again been entered after the destruction of the city of Tabos, when it was invaded by Carmopolis after the year 7600 BC. This sanctuary, which was then lost, has never yet been found, and it will not again be revealed unto the mortal men of earth, until the time when my father Ptah shall command me to say, Open. When that day shall dawn, the world shall again be afforded a sight of that sacred house, in which are hidden the secret mysteries of initiation of the inner eye of the cosmic Trinity. Even then, my children, they shall be as nothing unto those who have not the divine truth within themselves. For the uninitiated men of earth shall be unable to decipher the sacred alphabet and symbols in which the mysteries are set down. Having made this thing clear unto you, I shall proceed with what took place at the Memphite center. But before doing so, I would say a few words concerning the initiate center of Heliopolis. The worship of Atennu, as the visible sign of the cosmos to the mortal men of earth, was carried on. The original rites of Atennu in Atlantis symbolized my beloved son Horus as the medium between the men of earth and the cosmic Trinity, the visible symbol of my son being the solar disk, having the 7 hands reaching out from it. In Heliopolis, however, the rites of Atennu were somewhat distorted, and the solar disk was actually worshipped as the cosmic Trinity, God, the one source of creation. The cult was pure and stainless, and the abominable rites of sacrifice were forbidden, as was also the consumption of animal flesh as a means of nourishment for the mortal body. The initiates of Heliopolis lived entirely upon fruit and loaves of meal, which they baked. Also did this center stand very much apart, and was exceedingly careful whom it accepted as neophyte, only those who could prove that they were of pure Egyptian blood being taken. The pyramidal center had become the most cosmopolitan and received neophytes from all parts of the then civilized world. This center became the most popular right up to the time of Khufu, the chief monarch of the authentic 4th dynasty. Indeed, it is set down by historians that he was responsible for the construction of the Great Pyramid, and 2 of his successors, Khafre and Mykonos, for the smaller 2 pyramids. The Sphinx is also attributed to this dynasty, which actually ruled the lands of Upper and Lower Egypt about 5500 BC. As I have already told you, my children, the priest monarch Hortep was responsible for the construction of the Sphinx and the 3 pyramids of Giza, which occupied a period of 1050 years to complete. I will now explain to you how the supposition has come about, which attributes the building of these monuments to the kings of the 4th dynasty. The first monarch of the 4th dynasty, who was called Khufu, was a man who was devoid of all religious tendencies, and the Great Pyramid had appealed to him as being a suitable tomb to receive his body when the time of his mortal death should come. He caused the necessary preparations to be made and the various funerary texts to be inscribed upon its walls. So, my children, you will see how the error which exists today concerning the Great Pyramid first came about. Khufu knew perfectly well what were the uses of the Great Pyramid of Giza, but he was a man full of materiality, and one who honored not God, his motto being, work, and let the gods chant their own praises. This monarch was a Yahweh's usurper, and one who lent a willing ear to the evil promptings of Satnaku. 2 of his successors, Khafre and Mykonos, also did not, being quite so material, follow in his footsteps, and proceeded to prepare the 2 remaining pyramids to receive their bodies. I would here tell you, my children, that the bodies of the 3 monarchs were moved by the priests of Memphis when they were again able to regain their old power, which they did when the first king of the 5th dynasty ascended the throne of the 2 lands, his name being Usir-Ka-Ra. From this time onward, the rites of initiation were carried on in the 3 chief centers, which I have already mentioned, and this continued up to the end of the Ptolemaic period. After this, the great empire of Egypt was devastated by her many avaricious enemies, and the shrines of the initiates were closed. I shall deal with this period at greater length later on in these my chronicles. My children, I would now take you to a period which existed about 2000 BC and 1500 BC, and when you read this my book, you will observe that the dates given to you by me do not coincide with the dates given to you by the material deductions that have been made by your historians. The difference is, however, infinitesimal when you think for a moment of the vastness of the ages which have existed. Even some of the more modern historical events cannot be vouched for without absolute certainty in many cases. I shall now take you to the 18th dynasty, which ruled Egypt during the period of 2000 and 1500 BC. This dynasty of monarchs was founded by Ahmose I, and it was his successor, Amhotep I, who founded the priestly brotherhood which officiated under the protecting wing of Amun-Ra at Thebes. Gradually this brotherhood obtained the old power which it had held in former times under the kings of the first three dynasties. The king was also a high priest of Amun, and this was purely an honorary title. The initiate brothers, who still existed as a very secret and select body, broke away from the material priesthood of Amun and practiced the old worship of Aten or Atenu, which was the religion of Heliopolis during the early dynasties of the Double Empire. They were regarded with much disfavor by the priests of Amun, who were looking purely for material advancement, and they were forced to live in seclusion and even hiding until the time of Amhotep III. He it was who wedded with a woman from the Tigris River, who was the incarnate female half of Adolamayo, the 11th master mentioned in the genealogical tree of the divine dynasty. She it was, my children, who persuaded the king to cease persecuting the followers of Atenu, and under her protecting hand the cult grew, and the ancient shrine of Heliopolis again reopened, and preached without fear the worship of Aten and Atenu. The day at length came when the queen's youngest son became the heir to the throne of his father. His elder brother, Thutmose, had been killed in a battle east of the delta of Lower Egypt. During the lifetime of his parents, the young prince was taught the worship of Aten, as the one god of life and light in his manifestation to mankind through nature and the solar disk. The young prince gladly absorbed all that his teachers told him, for he was of a loving and peaceful disposition, and hated wars, and especially the bloody sacrifice of the priest of Amun. In the 12th year of his life he was sent to the center of Heliopolis, where he learned the initiation of Ra Atenu. In the meanwhile, the priests of Amun were becoming more and more perturbed, and he was a successor to the throne of his father Amhotep III, when the monarch should pass out. The initiate master of Heliopolis, who was an incarnation of Oneferu, knew and recognized in the young prince an incarnation of El Eros, Erosufu, and believed that through him Egypt would be converted to the worship of Atenu, and the priests of Amun be finally overthrown. And to this end did Oneferu work upon the mind of the young prince. At this point, my children, I would leave El Erosufu for a brief space and take you to the brotherhood of Amun-Ra at Thebes.